one of my level 3 techs, this dude is doing network engineering at a very high level, corporate companies, designing virtualization. He's doing systems architecture, storage solutions, and everything else. He worked at a flower shop 5 years ago. So how did he get there? How do we go from a flower shop? I should just bring him on for an interview sometime. He's great.
Welcome to the show, Tom. Do you mind taking a few minutes and kind of introducing yourself and how you got started in the field?
Sure. I usually introduce myself on my YouTube channel as Tom here from Lawrence Systems. So yes, still Tom here from Lawrence Systems. And I've been in the field since 1995. So it's been so long, it's hard to remember how I got here. But the field was a lot different then, and it was very few people got in. I used to joke that the bar of entry was so high. It's why people say the tech field's changed a lot. In some ways it has, because you had to be really determined that you wanted to work in tech back then, because no one knew what you were talking about. What do you mean you want to work on? Yeah, computers they're kind of a thing in 1995 when I got my first job, but they're not. They're still amongst the small group of people, because we don't have everything starting with www. This is before the .com boom and everything else. So a lot of it comes down to, and we'll roll back to me being young, I took everything apart. When I got older, I figured out how to put it back together. So I was pretty determined from a young age to dive into things from a very technical standpoint. I loved electronics and things like that, Radio Shack. I was never a Toys R Us kid. I always say I was a Radio Shack kid. So that was my, your parents, where do you want to go for your birthday? Radio Shack. I need more solder. It's always
absolutely.
And there was this cool guy, Daryl, who at the Radio Shack recognized my passion for it. And they gave me like stuff that they were getting rid of all the time. So I actually had some what was obsolete, because people like, oh, you had a TRS 80. I'm like, yeah. They're like, so you got it in 1980? I'm like, no, my parents couldn't afford that. I got it in like 87 when I was like 10. and then I got it when it was being clearanced at Radio Shack for the Tandy 1000s that were coming out. And then I got more into it. But they gave me all the old books they had back there, and I read them cover to cover as many times as I could. So I just always had like a strong passion for things technical, and dove into it. So chasing the career just seemed like an obvious choice, even though back then it was not high paying necessarily in 1995. And I remember I was out with my son last night, and we had to drive somewhere about 45 minutes away. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's the building I used to work at that used to be a computer store. And he's like, that's a far drive, Dad. I'm like, that's the closest one I could find. I was like, there's a computer store. I found it. It's like 45 minutes away. So I applied for a job, and they hired me.
Nice. No, and that's very similar to my upbringing. I remember constantly as a kid, I was taking things apart with or without my parents, permission to, and just like constantly trying to figure out how it worked. And, at first I seldomly ever got them back together in a functioning manner, it seemed like, I learned something.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's you're going to learn something. You're going to learn how to make your parents angry taking it apart. I learned that a lot. But eventually, I won't lie. I went garbage picking whenever I could for electronic things. I just wanted to see how everything worked. So it was it was and still is the drive to make something different, hacking it and things like that. That's definitely. I see you got the DEF CON hat on. That's near and dear to my heart as any hacking stuff, because you're way more likely to find me at a hacking conference than you are at some IT professional conference. I don't go to as many of those, but hacking conferences, I'm like, oh, I'm all in. Or Linux conferences. I kind of feel they're the same. They're of the same ilk of everyone wanting to share the knowledge without a bunch of businesses trying to sell me something.
Exactly. And I can completely relate to that statement there too. I mean, it's almost like a different, like, the people that like to attend those are almost cut from a different type of fabric. You know what I mean? Then they're all very similar in personality and their drive to figure out how things work. And a lot of times make them work in a way they weren't intended to for even a greater purpose. And that always piques my interest. So, for someone who, if you're watching this and you can relate, definitely, those might be the fields for you. Speaking of the fields, let's kind of dive into some advice you have. You've been in the field and you've kind of seen it evolve, and you run your own company, Lawrence Systems, which is amazing. Which I think business owners in your kind of position get a different perspective on the field. On you're in the trenches and you're actually dealing with it more, and you get to see what's actually working. What is some of your advice for people who are looking to kind of break into the field and get that initial start?
First I'll clarify a few things. So I've had my company since 2003, and I've done my time in enterprise tech, and currently we're a MSP or managed service provider. Last I counted, I think there's 70 businesses that we're doing outside IT for, but we also are a consultancy, so we consult with a lot of internal IT teams. So a little perspective of my company having a foot in both worlds. I say that because a lot of times if you just look at the MSP space, you're talking about managing and contracts for small businesses, which are all a lot in the cloud. The consultancy is the other side, which is what drives some of my YouTube channel, is all the things that aren't in the cloud. And there's actually more things. We've pulled things out of the cloud more frequently than people realize. It's becoming a popular thing. But you want to get started in this. This is one of the reasons me and Jay started like the Home Lab show, and why I talk about things and talk about accessibility. And I use a ton of open source. One of the things I always try to do is find something that's very accessible to people, that the bar is as low as possible for entry. It may be your time. It may be that you have to do some reading. I want to make sure that the tools I talk about and the ones I focus on the most are going to be things that are extremely accessible. This is why you see Linux took off so well, is because in the early days we didn't have money to buy Microsoft licenses for things. Even if we pirated, it wasn't, we're not going to lie. It was in the 90s, it was a thing. And yes, that's when I started getting into Linux. That accessibility makes a big difference, and it gives people those tools to really follow their passions and get into it. So if you find some of the things you're interested in and you start putting that and building your knowledge base on there, you'll find a lot of companies will hire for that. It's hard to get that experience, but just start in there and you'll keep hammering away at some of the places, because you'd be shocked at how many places might just say yes. And even if it's just an internship, even if it's just something basic, it gets your foot in the door so you have an understanding, because the knowledge is one side of it. The interaction, as you know, like working with other people and things like that, is the learning curve you have. That's one of the reasons they want experience. Oh, cool. Great. You know how to set up a network, or you know how to set up this Cisco. You got your CCNE, but do you know what it looks like doing this with a customer? And that's where you need the experience, and it's where people just say, I have the knowledge. Why don't they just hire me? And I'm like, that's so hard. It's also hard to qualify people. So keep working on those referrals and things to get a friend in there. And even if you have to take a little bit of a not getting the pay you want, it gets your foot in the door to build that experience.
Absolutely. And one thing I've noticed working in the field, and I've heard from other people, is once you kind of get your initial foot in the door and, get that experience, all of a sudden, all these other doors will open for you, you'll find out. And it becomes a lot easier to, once you kind of get that initial experience, to branch out in to really the roles you much more desire, the pay you desire, and stuff like that. And just getting that initial foothold. And, one thing I personally did to get that initial foothold is I would start playing with a lot of these open source softwares and start building my own home labs. And, like I used pfSense and built my own home firewall, and I constantly managed it and did things like that. And then when I went on the interviews, I started talking about those things, and they're like, wow, he's doing the things we want him to do here at home. He's living and breathing it. So we need to hire this person on our payroll. So absolutely.
Well, one of the people I hired, this is interesting. So one of the people I hired, I loved his resume, and his interview was, I liked the person, but his interview was funny. I was like, so, you worked in tech before? And I looked at his resume, and it's like Jimmy John's and, the usual places. He's like, I don't know, 19 or 20. And he's like, no, I just really like computers. And he goes, I'm not going to lie. I backed into my boss at Jimmy John's, and he fired me after I hit his car doing a delivery. And I'm just like, good icebreaker there. But he had his GitHub listed. And so I said, all right, I'll talk, nice interview, but I'll talk to you later. Look up his GitHub. The dude has open source contributions, and starting at when he was 16. I had to do the math how old he was. I'm like, they got accepted into Wikimedia. He contributed to all these different open source things. Like, his coding skills were top. Now I'm like, how are you 19 and able to code like this? And he goes, oh yeah, that's my hobby, but you didn't hire me for coding, so I didn't bring it up, because when I brought him back in to hire him, I was like, you can code, right? It goes, yeah, but you didn't ask that. You asked if I could fix computers, because he was just going to take in computers at my retail store. Right. I was like, yeah, dude, I think I can hire you for a few other things. And he helped me write a bunch of stuff. So getting that out there and just participating in those communities can really help your hireability and bring it up if you're doing it. Like, even if your job is a network engineer, if someone knows you have some coding skills, that says something. Like, they're like, oh, that person knows how to do something more expanded than maybe what I'm hiring them for. And it maybe open up an extra opportunity for you. So don't be afraid to do those. Get out there and make those contributions. Even if it's just a blog about all the tech projects you worked on, you'd be shocked at how many other hiring people I know that will look out for a blog, look out for some Medium posts about, because you took apart a Raspberry Pi, because you built some home automation. Maybe it's not related to the job, but it shows a lot of initiative and drive that you're passionate about tech. And that matters a lot to people who really, are like myself and work in this business. Corporate job, maybe they don't look at it as much, but don't start at the corporate world. Start working for a small business. You'll be happier. Corporate places may have that big dollar to hang out in front of you, but I think you've worked in the corporate world, so you know.
Oh yes, I have definitely been there, and I can completely relate. It's so much more enjoyable. My current company I work for we have 25 employees, including myself. It's a small organization, and your opinion actually feels like it matters in those smaller organizations, and you can contribute a lot more. And you also, when those small organizations, nine times out of 10, you become more of a jack of all trades. You're not when those big corporations, you always end up getting siloed off into this small little section of IT, where in the big corporate world, one day I'm fixing printers. The other day I'm trying to restore the internet to 3 different cities. You know what I mean? So I get a taste of it all, and I really enjoy that. So
the broader experience is amazing. It's one of those things I've cringed at for years. So Ford Motor Company and General Motors are the 2 big places here in Detroit. And people are like, oh, my friend knows really good IT. He works IT at Ford. I'm like, he's pigeonholed into a single task. Like they don't have jack of all trades with like the 300-person, 400-person IT teams at these companies. They have a person who knows how to turn the knob on this box. Like that's what their task is.
Exactly.
They don't look out of it. Like I said, it's something I can't emphasize enough. It's great starting at these small businesses, and you may want to stay there if you like that diversity. If I just had to turn a knob on one style box all day, I'd probably go crazy. So,
and I get asked this question a lot. I'm the director of network operations for an ISP, and I'll get asked, the salary question will get brought up, and they're like, wow, you could be making more. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I could make more, but I wouldn't enjoy it as much. I don't want to work for those big organizations where I get pigeonholed into a corner, or, I feel like my opinion doesn't matter. I like getting down in the thick of it. There is the occasion where I'm actually out we're a fiber optic provider. I've had to actually go out in the field, in the trenches with the guys on a rare occasion. And I enjoy that once in a while. You know what? It gets me out of the office, and I get to actually see the other side of what I'm doing. I don't want to get stuck in, a very blah corner and just constantly looking at my logs and reacting to this little section of access I have. So yeah, that is some really great advice.
And my friend, so he's under a lot of rules because he works for, we'll just say Fortune 500 is in the list of his, where he works. Top at the security, paid extremely well, but hates his job. The conversations we have, and I want to do an anonymous thing. He's not even allowed to list on LinkedIn where he works. So I want to do like I don't know if we have to do a voice disguiser. I said, dude, I don't want to get you in trouble, but these stories are so good about what goes on at this large company. It's so cringy and stupid, like the dumbest arguments about all these SOC notices, just how much malware. And he's managing over 200,000 endpoints he's responsible for. Like, it's insane. The team is huge, but the stupidity and the politics, that's all he does is fight with office politics more than he does tech. He goes, I just want to do more Python stuff with the SIM tools, but no, we're going to have 6 hours of meetings this week.
to talk about like one little thing that's probably not even that important, where in my world, I see a problem. Okay, I fix it, and then report afterwards. Hey, this was the issue we had. I already repaired it, by the way, but I just want to let you know. You know what I mean? So it's just a different way of thinking, and I don't think people realize that. I think a lot of people, especially new to the field, get fixated on that dollar. Like, oh, I'm going to get into tech, and I'm going to make big bucks. And it's very easy to make big bucks in tech. If you are driven, but it's also really easy to get stuck in a miserable job. And that's just one really thing you got to look out for. Yeah.
And he's actually pretty solid on his plan because he's working here as long as he will tolerate it. And there comes a point because he's just banking the money. He lives way below his means. I'm banking the money. He goes, I'm going to cash out one day and do something I'd much rather do. And just have all those investments. Like he does have a strategy for it. And if you have a strategy for it, awesome. He learned a lot. It's cool, but also it's not diverse. It's mostly meetings and arguments at the top.
Understandable. I can completely relate, and we've kind of been talking about that next job, that career advancement. What are some things people can do once they kind of get into the field to level themselves up to get ready to jump into that higher level role, maybe that job they enjoy a lot more? What is some advice you have for those people?
So one of my level 3 techs, this dude is doing network engineering at a very high level, corporate companies, designing virtualization. He's doing systems architecture, storage solutions, and everything else. He worked at a flower shop 5 years ago. So how did he get there? How do we go from a flower shop? I should just bring him on for an interview sometime. He's great. But the whole thing is compared to, and he in some ways has leapfrog techs that have been there longer. What's the difference? And it's not at all to throw any shade at any of the other techs. They're brilliant people, but there's like a determination. I haven't figured out how to describe it, but you'll know it when you see it as an employer, or you'll know it when you have it. You're just very determined to learn more. And you're constantly going, how does this work? You look around, especially when you're at a small business, you get to wear a lot of hats. You have the opportunity to wear hats. So you look around and go, what are the other people doing? What are the other level 3 techs doing? And I'm a level 1 tech. I started, I'm help desk. And you start figuring out, hey, can I shadow you? Can I jump on that call with you? Just ask. You'd be shocked at how many of them go, yeah, of course. Why not? I mean, you don't have any, your tickets are closed. Cool. Come over here. You start playing with the same tools they're using. You go, can I set that at home? Can I set it up in a lab? And any good company should have a lab. We have a big lab. The staff has an immense amount of lab stuff they can play with. There's stuff all racked in shelves. They can turn anything on they want. The reality is most companies will even probably let you, if you have extra switches, take one home and play with it. Take the time to figure out what those other roles are and just start doing that job in your head. And you'll really be surprised how quickly you can level up to those other levels. Start taking those more complicated tickets if you're level 1. See if you can figure it out. Start writing those SOPs that you obviously watch whenever something you're level 1, you're like, I don't know why this printer don't work. Kick it up to level 2. And then you have to really examine why they follow it. Some techs don't. Some techs are like, not my problem. That problem now. I'll go back to the next thing that I know how to fix.
And that's like the number one way to get stuck in your position is, once you kick that thing up, if you don't do that follow up, you're not going to learn anything new. If you want advancement, you need to take ownership of the issues and see them through.
You have to ask how they fixed it. It's just really that simple. Like, oh, I kicked it over to level 2. It's not my problem. I'm going to jump on to the next thing. Now, some places make this more difficult by making it kind of a grindy sweatshop. And go to Reddit, r sysadmin, at least once a day, this job, career, blah, blah, blah sucks. And the reality is, don't let that give you a bad impression about tech companies. There are always bad companies. You know what people don't have time to do? Talk about the good company they're working for because they're busy working. They're happy. They're not going to go in there and complain. For as big as the tech industry, the fact there's only like 1 or 2 people a day complaining in our sysadmin, which has 100,000 people, take that as a percentage. Like the majority of jobs are actually good. Just find another one. Now it can be tricky if you're in a rural area. I think you are. You're in. You're great.
I'm in a very small town. I'm in Oregon of a town of a couple thousand, and I literally end up having to pick up and move to get my initial start in the field because where I lived there just wasn't those entry level jobs. But the thing is, after going and doing my experience, I got 2 years of experience. I moved back and was making way more money than I ever was here, living in the exact same area where I started.
And while remote work does open up opportunity, you're going to miss a lot if you're remote all the time. There's this level of interaction. There's a reason, and as much as I've grown up online in the BBS days, we're talking, before the internet, I was on the BBS. So I'm that person, but we still looked for, and this goes back to the hacker community, those interactions of when we got people together in the same place. I remember when we had some of the first hacker conventions that the shenanigans got out of hand, so they fell apart. But in 2001, we had a big hacker convention in Detroit. It lasted from 2000, 2001. I think the last one was 2002 or 3, and then the shenanigans got excessive and they couldn't find a venue that would hold them. But we look forward to those direct interactions with people. And I bring that up because the hacking convention are still another place where you can meet people to get those referrals. But that in person still, we have not figured out a way despite all the technology we have to have a more in-depth conversation online in the same way that we do in person. Those in-person meetings are exciting, even if they only happen once a year. That same thing goes for working at some place. The human interaction levels, I try to bring, it was all my staff currently lives within range of my office, even though they work remotely. We're always trying to make sure at least once in a while they come back to the office just to hang out. I don't care. We're just having pizza and we're going to just talk about things in a very open environment. It's way easier than the Slack channels and things like that.
Exactly. And, a lot of people who are trying to get into the field, one thing I tell them, go on to sites like meetup.com or LinkedIn and look for those in-person networking events in the field. And you're going to gain so much knowledge and build those connections. And it's one thing I really hate to say that the IT field is, it's a lot of times it can still be not what you know, it's who you know. Mm-hmm. So go to those events and get to know people. I love going to conferences purely for the fact I get to network with people. I love looking at the vendors and listening to the talks, but what I get out of it most is making new connections in the field. And there's something about making that face-to-face connection. I can go to LinkedIn and get 2,000 followers and have all these connections, but I've never talked to the people. Where when I go to a conference and I get to know someone and talk to them, I literally was at one yesterday and I got to meet someone that actually happened to live just down the road from me. And, we exchanged information and we had so much in common. And we actually, I ended up helping them troubleshoot a problem that they've been having. And, it's just unique situations. And, it's such a great resource for someone in the tech field. I highly recommend if you have the opportunity to go to these conferences and stuff, go to them, because you're not going to just learn something. You're going to really build those important connections you need in the IT field.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of studies you can cite for just in general, the who you know thing. It doesn't just work for this industry. Look at any industry. Those are some of your best referrals, or those warm referrals with people. And how do you know people, though? You're like, oh, it's just because they know someone. I'm like, yeah, get out there and know someone. The biggest thing that has helped me over the years is constantly being and kind of forcing myself to be social. One of my other friends, not the most social person, but he has a trick he does that's made him where he's at. He's very successful, but everywhere he goes, the backpack he has a whiskey bottle where the water bottle should be, and he just walks up to people, hacking conferences, or even he's done this to the point where we're figuring out what conferences, the professional conferences, pull the whiskey bottle out, and he's got little plastic shot glasses. He just pours them for people. It's just he doesn't know how to start the conversation, but he knows a conversation will start if he does that.
Nice. That's such a great tip. And, I think, it's just getting out there and finding a way to break the ice and just get to know people. And, you'll find out when you build these connections, when you either have a big problem, or B, you have lost your job and you're looking for new ones. If you have that network of people, it's going to be so helpful for you to just continue on what you're doing. It's really great.
One of those things about that is that whole finding the meetups or starting the meetups. I just can't emphasize enough how many people I've met over the years that actually led to every piece of my career. I thought about doing a whole mind map and mapping that out. Even customers I found, how do you get business and things like that? People buy from people I went to all these other conferences and things like that. So it's something actually we're doing is kind of draw those connections, figure out where the gap are. You can turn this into, because I'm very technical. Everyone assumes I'm not going till they meet me in person. I'm like, if you ask me questions, I will answer them. But if I'm in a crowd of people, I have a hard time talking. So there's still ways you can get around that and just start really conditioning yourself to do it. Because default is behind a keyboard for me. So don't be afraid if you're just thinking I'm shy and I can't be like these guys who do YouTube videos. I never want to make people think that. You can actually learn. It's like anything else. You learn how to do some bash scripts or some PowerShell. You can learn how to talk to people. It's hard.
It is one of the most important skills in the IT field, I believe, is your people skills, your ability to talk to people, because gone are the days of the basement IT department that smells like old pizza boxes and dirty socks. I mean, IT is a frontline position where you're talking to people and dealing with people every day. Whether you're remote or not, you still need to be able to communicate and talk to people, because that's going to take you the furthest, is those skills. It's happened to me twice now where both of my bosses have told me the reason I was hired. There's people that had college degrees and way more experience and skills than I personally had. But the reason they hired me is they could see my communication skills and the way I could problem solve and talk to people about it and explain things in a way that I didn't feel like I was talking down to the people that didn't know as much. They hired me for those skills because those skills sometimes can be the hardest ones to teach, where you can learn all the hard skills, on the job, but going out to these different events will really help you work and build those skills, because you go out there and force yourself to talk to people and build these connections, and before you know it, you're going to be accelerating way faster than you ever thought you could.
So I have an advisory role on a school board that does, well, specifically like vocational training to get people into technology. And they have an incredibly high placement rate and, great intake rate and everything else. They work in the inner city in Detroit. But one of the things, like if people ask, well, what do you actually do there, Tom, when you're on the board? Do you make sure they're having the right test taken for CompTIA and the right certifications? I'm like, nope. I spent an hour talking about, more than anything else, the soft skills training section and how that works. That is one of the biggest discussion topics I have, because awesome, you got them to the level they can pass Pen Test Plus, they can pass Network Plus and all the other CompTIA certs. That's cool. Could they actually work somewhere? And that's a lot of what I discuss with the training curriculum they do. Is there's a big section on soft skills training, and it's something that is the school has a good understanding. It's one of the reasons me and some of the people on the board talk about this, as they hired us as advisors, but they wanted people who employ people like myself to say, what is the problem? And I'm like, I got a guy that I can't let talk to other people because he's obnoxious. These are my challenges. Why do you keep him then? I said, because he's brilliant. He just can, there's not a network engineering problem. I'm 100% confident in his technical skills. I'm also confident he's going to make someone angry in the next hour. So, so it's required. And after this person's worked for me a long time, we've built the soft skills into them. But boy, that was hard versus if they come out of school thinking a lot about that, thinking about how they do, especially ethics is a thing they may not understand of where their job starts and ends. And it is not by judging what's going on at any particular company based on some limited context. So there's a lot of those little things. We've actually done this at some of the conferences where we had an entire sysadmin ethics talk, which actually went really well because we threw in all these scenarios that only as a veteran, like what's the decision you make? Here's the information you're presented with. Here's the decision you might have made, but this would have been the wrong decision because here's further context. And yeah, because we always know who's getting fired before they get fired. I mean, we get the notice Thursday.
Oh, absolutely.
They get the notice Friday, Thursday. We're like, you're going to have to unwind Dave. And we're like, do we tell Dave? I kind of like the guy. And you're like, no, you don't tell Dave.
No.
This is not how that works.
And you learn really quick working in the IT department. A lot of times you get privy to a lot of information that you really don't, it's like that unspoken rule. Just because I have access to all the HR documents doesn't mean I'm going to go through them and be looking at them. It's that unspoken rule and those ethics that, weigh heavily, because it only takes one person to abuse that power to ruin it for the rest of the people trying to work for that organization. And I've more often than not been that person that got hired after that person that abused it and had to ensure and build that trust back up, because trust is, easily taken. It takes years to build in that organization, but can be gone in a heartbeat, just one wrong move. So that is a very great talking point. And we could create a whole episode just about ethics,
it might be fun. I might maybe we'll get some people together and bring a few people on I know that are long veterans that have some fun stories of craziness.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think anyone who's been in the field for a while has had some crazy story about ethics where, you have like a CEO of a company coming to you and they're like, hey, be by your computer at 2:00 tomorrow. And you're like, why? Well, and then they tell you the reason. I'm like, oh snap! So I mean, if you've been in the field, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some big wigs getting let go or something, hostile situation.
People doing embezzlement and things like that. Where there's a lot. I mean, you're kind of like, well, they're like, are they logging in after hours to the banking system? Well, their web login sure does. So,
exactly.
I feel like I'm part of an investigation now. I should just not say anything. So I know.
And sometimes you literally are, at my job, I get court subpoenas probably on a weekly basis for things I can never tell you about.
Right.
And and I'll have to get information on something, and I'm like, your mind gets blown, and you're like, "Ooh, man, I can't believe this." And literally, I can never tell a soul about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
There's a fun collision in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to find out more about Lawrence Systems and all the amazing work you do on your YouTube channel, where can they find you?
Pretty much, everything starts at lawrencesystems.com. And if that's too much to spell, I also have Lawrence.video to make it easy to find. Because I started creating a bunch of URLs that are shorteners that land on different pages. So you'll see those kind of sprinkled around in my videos, trying to consolidate all the playlists and keep the knowledge somewhat. When you create a lot of content, then you realize you've created a mess. And so I'm working on organizing the content into certain playlists for topics people are looking for. But you can all find a lot of that on lawrencesystems.com, and it spiders out from there.
Nice. I have to absolutely admit, I've watched many of your videos while I've been stuck on a problem, especially your PFSense videos and stuff like that. And you make some amazing tutorials that are super helpful in the community. So thank you for that. Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking the time to really give us that insider knowledge and that insider view of the IT field. And I'd love to have you back whenever you have some time.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. I hope this video is informative for you. And until next time, keep learning.